started, James.
Yes, hi. It's certainly a privilege of mine to be on your show. I've watched your show periodically over the past couple of years, and it's been a pleasure to watch that. I've learnt some things as well, in all fairness, even things about Islam I didn't know. It's an honor to be on the channel, speaking to you, and yeah, I can't wait to discuss my experiences of Islam, being brought up as a Muslim, and how I got through to being convinced that the Bible is the truth.
Excellent. Before we jump into that, I don't know if you heard this, but someone has already brought it up in the chat. Ijaz, the Muslim apologist, was just caught on camera making some racist remarks and trying to reveal a Christian he was talking to's identity, and then implying that people were going to come and get him. Have you heard about that?
I did watch on one of the other Christian channels, I think it was Islam Critiqued. He put something up on his channel. I did watch it, but to be honest with you, what I was listening to was pretty much a default, what I call the Muslim default of their personality. And when you consider the life course of Allah and Muhammad, I just thought, well, you're following your God and your Prophet perfectly. So what are we to expect?
Excellent. Yeah, you know, I kind of have a similar reaction. That I was disappointed to see that kind of behavior, but I certainly wasn't surprised. We see this behavior not only in the life of Muhammad, but also in, you know, the sacred Sharia law. We see it in the Hadith collections. We see it in the Sirah, the biographies of Muhammad. So it's a major part of Islam. It's really disingenuous when modern Muslims come and say, you know, Islam's a religion of peace. Well, no, not really.
No, it's a religion of peace. Once they've eliminated all other religions in that local community, then they can establish peace. So there's two ways of saying it's a religion of peace. Yes, it's a religion of peace, but they're lying because the text contradicts that. Or it's a religion of peace, but we'll establish peace when we've eliminated all our enemies.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So let's go ahead and dive into your story. Why don't you just start by describing your background a little bit? Where did you grow up, and how would you describe your home life growing up?
Well, I'm 52 years old, so I was born in the late 60s, mixed race. So my father is Pakistani, my mum's English, two younger brothers than myself. So I would say I was brought up in a unique period of time because I have a particular love of music, so heavily influenced by music. One of the advantages of being mixed race is that you get to listen to music from other continents as well. So that's one, and you know, and the movies and the TV shows of that period of time as well. So a great time as far as that moment in history is concerned. But being brought up, being mixed race, as we'll discuss later, probably, you know, it has its own setbacks as well, and difficulties, obstacles, and hurdles that I had to live through. And particularly during that period of time in England's history as well, when you had a lot of racist gangs like this. There'd be like the punks and the skinheads and the mods, that kind of that tribalism that was taking place, the football violence that was taking place in England during that period of time with the fights on the terraces, and political upheavals. Politics was changing during that period of time. You had, like, even though you may not agree with politics, or you do agree with politics, but whether you like them or loathe the politicians, they were serious politicians at the time, and the transformation into what are now are just cartoon caricatures of what politics was supposed to be. You can hardly take these people seriously now. So interesting times to live in whilst being brought up in the mixed race community. Me being brought up as a mixed race person, but I hate the term mixed race. I'm not mixed. I've just got, well, dual heritage then. I think that's the politically correct term to use now. During the period of time that from the community as well, being brought up in an Asian community that in itself was growing.
Very good. So I think it would be safe to say that, or fair to say that you grew up in an environment where, you know, violence was surrounded in you, but you also kind of grew up in an environment where both Christianity and Islam were prevalent, that you're introduced to both of those religions. As a child, which did you find more appealing and why?
Well, you're brought up as a Muslim. Irrespective, if you're brought up as where your parents are both from a foreign nationality, as I say, for African, Indian, Pakistani, Iranian, Afghani, whatever, your default is Islam. So you're going to be brought up in the Muslim community, in a Muslim household, with the Muslim traditions of halal meat, the halal, you know, like Islamic dress code. You're exposed to, say, not English movies, but say Bollywood movies, Bollywood music, that kind of upbringing. But when you go to school, and it was happening at the time, because I say I'm 52 years old, so Christianity was taught in school. So that would be what my source of Christianity was at that particular time. And it wasn't a great source, but it was enough to have an influence on me. I remember reading like Ladybird books about Jesus talking to children, and Jesus's personality coming through a little bit, though I was young at the time, but it had enough of an impression on me that it was kind of like, well, I need to know more about this Jesus, whoever he is. So that would be, but also if I can just add as well, during the 70s, there was almost like a semi-revival, from what I remember, of Christianity. So you had Christian programs every now and again on television in England, particularly on a Sunday. There was the movie with Robert Powell, Jesus of Nazareth, and also the Turin Shroud every now and again was something that was frequently documented on television. So those were my influences at the time, or exposure, as it were, to Christianity. Other than that, I had no other exposure to Christianity, being brought up as a Muslim.
Excellent. Yeah, so you are introduced to Christianity and, you know, kind of the education system on TV and public and whatnot, but at home, your only option was to be a Muslim. So describe what it was like living at home under a, you know, strict Muslim environment.
Well, you say strict. I wouldn't say that my dad, in fairness to him, was a strict Muslim. To be honest with you, he was more pro-communist, which I think is a default of many Asian people, not just Muslim, but Sikhs and Hindus as well, from my experience, that they've been brought up in a particular religious environment that just does not make sense. And it's had such an influence on their own mind and heart that the default is to strive towards communism. So that would be where I think my dad had his internal leanings were towards communism. However, being brought up in the Asian community meant that you had to be brought up as a Muslim. So it was halal meat, Bollywood movies, as I say, when guests came around. There were only ever Muslim guests from the Muslim community. They would never say my mum's friends or mum's family or anything like that. So the only exposure you had of, say, English culture was when I went to school. When I got back home, it was pretty much everything was Islamic. And it wasn't Islamic because my dad was, in a true sense, a Muslim. It was because that's what the community expected from you, you know, or expected from the family. So the only time Christianity was ever mentioned in the household is when guests came over, and, you know, who were probably more Islamic than what my dad was. They'd start the conversations, and it'd be pretty much a Bible bash fest where, you know, Christianity, and they perceived the way that the English community was. We just come out of the roaring 60s, the sexual revolution, the dress codes had changed, modesty had been thrown out the window, and it was perceived that because that's how white people had become in the West, this is what Christianity, they conflated the two. They conflated Christianity with fashion, and somehow this is what Christianity is. And therefore, it gave the impression that Islam had a high moral, spiritual platform to stand on, as opposed to Islam, because of the conflation.
So you're saying that it was more of a cultural thing than a religious thing, that maybe your family looked at, and, you know, other Muslims in the community looked at themselves and saw that they were living in a more modest fashion, that they had better outward appearances, so to speak,
so to
and
speak.
that's what gave them pride to be Muslims.
Yeah, and it's not just unique to the Muslim family. The Sikhs and the Hindus have the same mentality as well. Though with Islam, you are educated in Islam. You are forced to go to Quran school and do the usual defaults of learning Islam in Arabic, learning what the namaz is, um, and so on and so forth. And as I was getting into my teens, one prominent character had started to appear. You've probably heard of his name. No doubt you would have done. I'd be surprised if you hadn't. Ahmadidat. And I was brought up on his diatribe. So you could say I was going to Quran school and reading this book in a language that I didn't understand, when nobody ever does. And then coming home and watching DVDs of Ahmadidat. So he was basically my tutor, as it was in Islam, that I had to sit there and listen to him droning on, and his debates with Christianity. And he was debating people like Gary Swaggart and so on and so forth. And it was perceived because he was getting the better of them, or giving these wonderful dynamic answers, because he is a great personality, irrespective of what you think of him. When you watch him, you kind of admire him. He's got a great charisma, but that charisma was perceived as victory for Islam, rather than, hang on a minute here, let's look at the arguments that he's presenting or the characters that he's debating.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've noticed a lot talking to Muslims, that it's more about appearances, more about projecting confidence, more about saying that you have the right answer and being really loud about it, than it is about making good arguments. When I try to make an argument, oftentimes, like, they don't even care about the points. They just want to shout you down, so to speak.
It's very much like evolution and atheism. And atheism, to me, is basically evolution. If you ask an evolutionist, what do you predicate existence on, they'll say, an atheist will say evolution. So in my mind, as far as I'm concerned, well, you're an evolutionist, so you're not an atheist. You're an evolutionist. And if you're an evolutionist, then atheism doesn't exist. Yeah, in a pure material outlook. So, and what I find with the two is that it's all predicated on emotion, not logic. And with the magician confuses the eye to confound the mind. The evolutionist or the atheist and the Muslim scholar, they confuse the ear to confound the mind. And you'll find that both of them are very clever at intellectual gatekeeping. And they'll use words and language and symbols that give the impression that they are intellectually and academically superior to you. So you are more inclined to listen and accept what they're saying. And because some of them have certain degrees or academic achievements, that's where the intellectual gatekeeping comes in. That is to say, right, I have no choice but to agree with you because you're the scholar and I'm not, and who am I to challenge you?
Yeah, definitely. There was a good comment from the chat, Stickman Sam, which, by the way, he says that he remembers you from talking to you in the comments, and said it was good to hear more of your testimony. He said that Ahmadidat is the Muslim equivalent of an atheist Christopher Hitchens, and I think that's very perceptive. That, and then KL added that atheists act much like Abdul's. I think that's a very perceptive comment, that atheists like to project that they're the smartest people in the world, that they're only following their reason. But at the end of the day, they just have made a presupposition that God doesn't exist. And then the vast majority of the time, I mean, of course there are exceptions, but the vast majority of times, atheists are only interested in saying, well, you haven't proven your case, therefore atheism is still true. We win by default. So it's kind of the same game as the Muslims play. You start with a presupposition and then you can't be argued out of it.
And the irony is, when you look at the two, evolution and its twin sibling atheism and Islam, they argue very much in the same way. They both appeal to science. They both appeal to logic. They both appeal to history, and both of them have no basis in logic. Neither of them have any basis in science, and neither of them have any basis in history. So I find that the subject matter may differ, but the attitude, the mindset, and the emotion are exactly the same. They're a mirror image of each other. It's the same argument, but a different subject.
Definitely. So you grew up as a Muslim, but at some point you began to doubt the truth of Islam. Can you tell us about that? What first made you start doubting?
Yeah, I think the more I started to learn about Islam in my early teens, for instance, I wouldn't say Aisha, Muhammad Aisha came later, but one of the first things I remember was that a Muslim can have 4 wives. And I don't know why. Now, many men might find that, that's a dream. But I go back to what the Apostle Paul said I think it's in the book of Romans, where it says that wherever man goes, he takes the law of God with him because it's written on the heart. So they do the law or the things of the law. I forget the scripture. I should have probably had that ready. I knew I was going to quote it as well. But I'm sure you know which one I mean, Thaddeus. So having one woman, and the irony is that I only ever wanted, in all my life, whatever I've wanted to do in my life, all I've ever wanted to do was just be married. I couldn't care less about academic achievements. I couldn't care less about a career. I certainly don't care about money. I certainly don't care about affluence and things like that. All I ever wanted to do is just have the love of a good woman and me be a good husband to her, right? The idea of you can have 4 wives, I just found totally repugnant. There was just something intrinsically wrong with that didn't sit right with me. And then the more you start looking into the Quran and you try get, say, Islamic English translations of the Quran, and then you're finding things like this God just talks about hell all the time. That's assuming you can understand what the ayah are actually saying. See, the Bible's quite coherent, even if you don't understand what's going on sometimes. And I'll admit that sometimes when I'm going through certain scriptures, I'm thinking, God, all these different names, son of such and such, this is going on, that's going on. I have to catch up a little bit. But you can do a bit of research and look at the background. But with the Quran, you just can't do that. It's not coherent and it doesn't make sense. And Allah's ranting about hell all the time. And then you come across other subjects, that the Quran talks about, like, and this goes back to what it started to make sense about, like the Muslim community where I was living, their attitude towards non-Muslims, because they're reflecting behind closed doors. And this is another thing as well, that the Islamic community projected itself as being friendly and kind, and they're not racist and such, but behind closed doors, these people are vile. They have such a prejudice and hatred of anything that's non-Pakistani or non-Muslim, or not. When I say Pakistani, predominantly the Rome, then by extension non-Muslim. That is okay. We care about ourselves more. We only concern for ourselves first. Then by extension Muslims. That is the Bengali, the Gujarati, the Indian Muslim, so on and so forth, the Punjabi Muslim, and then by extension Muslims that are coming from other continents, and that's where the limits are. And they have their own racism inside. So I found that the more I read of the Quran in English, the more I saw the rhetoric I heard behind closed doors matched what the Quran said, but it didn't fit the narrative of what these people were like when they're out in the streets, outside in the public. So that would be what I found from the Quran.
That's very interesting that, you saw this moral teaching of Islam and you inherently recognized that there was something wrong with that teaching, that one man cannot properly care for 4 wives, that there'll inherently be differences among them, and there'll be jealousy and whatnot, and then secondarily seeing that the negative attitudes you saw within the Islamic community perfectly reflected what you saw in the Quran. So in effect, it was learning more about Islam that made you not interested in it. Is that correct?
Yeah, the more I learned about it, I find, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, I am not unique in this situation, because we're all made in the image of God, going by what Genesis 1:28 says, and also remind that scripture in Romans that we have it written on our hearts, as it were, the kind of people that we are. Genetically, we're predisposed to liking and disliking things like, you know, murder is repugnant, thieving is wrong, lying is wrong, sleeping with another man's wife is wrong. That you don't have to be told that. That's written in our like DNA codes, in our psyche. So I won't be. That applies to every man, woman that's on the planet. So I'm not unique in being brought up in this Asian community, this Muslim community, and finding Islam repugnant. There will be other men like me too. The thing is, they just don't have, both male and female, don't have the strength of character or the circumstances to respond in the way that I responded. I think being born in England gave me that opportunity to respond the way I did. Whereas if you're brought up in a full Muslim country, you don't have that ability or access.
Yeah, definitely. If you know, you grow up in an environment where 99% of everyone who lives there believes the exact same thing, you may never come to realize that there are other opinions, and start doubting that there's, or you know, even that there's another option other than believing in Islam. People might just think, well, this is what everyone does, so it must be correct.
And because, you know, they've been brought up with Quranic education and the rhetoric and propaganda within the community and the DVDs that you get from the local halal shop, they may have a prejudice towards Islam themselves, but because of the propaganda against other religions from the DVDs that they watch at home, they have nowhere else to go, because the Islam has already created a prejudice within them to not look at the Bible. Oh, the Bible's been corrupted. Look at the Western world, it's so decadent because of Christianity. Oh, the Hindus, they drink cow urine, which is interesting because Muhammad said it's okay to drink camel urine himself. So, but we won't go just there just yet. We're not like, say, the Buddhists, who they don't know where they are or what they're doing at any one given. So the point I'm trying to make is that Islam, you can have a prejudice to Islam because you've been brought up in the community and you see Islam for what it is, but it also prejudices you against anything else, which is why I said that the default tends to be from that community that you go towards communism.
That's very interesting. One thing that I've been talking to Muslims for maybe 2.5 years, and before that I only knew, you know, basic things, and I knew some basic problems. I knew why it couldn't be a true religion, but I had no idea that the type of culture that most Muslims are brought up. And one thing that shocked me more than anything is that the vast majority of at least online Muslims that I talk to, it seems their confidence in Islam is based primarily on Christianity is evil.
Yeah.
So Islam must be true. Would you say that's a fair observation?
Oh, absolutely. Because whenever you talk to a Muslim, it's never about a defense of their faith. It's an attack on your faith. So that really should say it all. Because you see, the Apostle Paul said, be ready to make a defense for your faith, for the hope that's within you. So Christianity in the Bible is predicated and encouraged on you. You know, I think the Apostle Paul says something like, you know, make sure you're in the truth. I paraphrase, but words to that effect. But Jesus says, keep on knocking, keep on seeking, keep on asking. Proverbs chapter 2 verses 1-5 says, dig for it as for hidden treasure. So let's talk about the knowledge of God and wisdom. So the Bible encourages education, that you have to become somebody who's going to follow and worship God. You have to know who he is. John 17:3, this means everlasting life, taken in the knowledge of the only true God and the one whom you set forth, Jesus Christ. So it talks about knowledge. Isaiah chapter 2 verses 2-4, teaching those about God. Matthew 28:19-20, yet again, teaching those to observe the commandments. So the Bible, anyway, the adherents of the Bible are predicated on you understanding the Bible. The adherents of Islam are not like that. You know why? Because if there had to be, if Islam was predicated on the understanding of Islam, could Islam stand? No, because when you start getting to Dhul Qarnayn and giant mountain walls made of iron, or you know, or Solomon and the Hoopy bird, or you can beat your wife, And then when you start getting into the hadith, you know, if a fly lands in your food, dip the whole fly in, because under one wing is the disease, under the other one is the cure. Or there was a stone that ran away with Moses's clothes, and then it still has the marks of when that stone got a beating from a stick. Islam can't be defended on that. You can't defend a religion if that's what you believe, you know. So the only other form of defense is attack. Well, if I can't defend my faith because I don't know that much about it, because I've not been told anything about it, what I have been told is how to attack yours. And that's where Islam is.
That actually kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that, and this is another respect that Islam and atheism are a lot alike, that they both think they're true by default, kind of, that, you know, we know why your beliefs are wrong, so ours must be true, but we don't have any reason to believe that ours are true on their own merits.
No, and things they what they don't understand is each one has to be read, looked at, or understood in the prism of its own glass, as it were. I can't look at Islam with the eyes of a Christian, so to speak, to understand Islam, but any more than a Muslim can understand Christianity by looking at it through the lens of Islam. But they try to do that, and it all becomes a mess. Each one has to be looked at individually. You can't look at the Bible with the eyes of an atheist. It doesn't work, because like you said, with presuppositions, all you're looking for is faults. And you're going to find them, because that's what you're looking for. Adam and Eve, where did he, you know, where did their children get their wives from? What, you believe in a global flood, which is interesting because the evidence of the flood is staring you in your face, you know, but maybe we'll touch on that later. Islam, well, you believe Jesus is a son of God, God can have a son? Just not understanding language and how language works, and the idioms that the nation of Israel would have used, and which would have, you know, passed on to the first century Christians, because that's where their influences were.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that we should go where the maximum evidence leads. If you're just going to say, well, if I can only explain, or if I can only prove 99% of your beliefs are true, and that 1% proves that my beliefs are actually true, that's not really being honest. I mean, every view is going to have some sort of weaknesses. So instead of looking at the weaknesses, you should evaluate each system independently on its own strengths.
It's like the old jigsaw analogy, where if you can't find where a piece of the jigsaw goes, you don't throw the whole jigsaw out, as it were. You know, continue with the rest, and find at some point you'll find where that piece fits.
Excellent analogy there. So a little while ago, A Day Without Yesterday asked a question. He said, did you leave Islam once you're financially independent, or whilst you're dependent on your family? We hadn't actually gotten, we got to your reasons why you started doubting Islam, but we hadn't gotten so far as how you actually went about it. So why don't you tell us how you came to actually leave Islam?
Yeah, I living in England, born in the late 60s, grew up through the 70s, heavily influenced my music, the disco, the hip hop, the pop music of the time, Tears for Fears, Depeche Mode, all that sort of stuff. Really, you know, I describe music as my best friend. And I found that the only way I was going to survive was to leave home. So when I left home, I left home as young as I legally could, and that's what I did. And by doing that, I was walking away from Islam, and I was walking away from the Asian community, and I just wanted to go and do my own thing, away from this racist, rabid, mendacious, malignant cancer on society. And I speak strongly, but if people are offended, my response is normally, well, when you look around the world, you do not have the problems you have in your communities with Sikhs, or Hindus, or Christians, or Jews, or even atheists, or Zoroastrians, or pagans. But everywhere you go, there's the same consistent pattern of schism, friction, tension, troubles, influencing in politics, and demanding of human rights, and blame culture. And only one religion ever raises that flag every time, and that's the religion of Islam. So I have 1400 years of history and 100 years of immigration around the world to show that my prejudices towards Islam are actually historically based.
Excellent. You kind of hinted at it already. But what were the personal repercussions of leaving Islam? Did you lose family, lose friends, that kind of thing?
Well, no, I was fortunate enough not to. It was frowned upon by the Asian community, but then I'd already, like I said, I have this great love for music, so I started going out nightclubbing when I was 15 years old. So I started going out clubbing, drinking, smoking cigarettes. I turned my back on education. So I'd already been manifesting what they would call Englishman religion, or you become Englishman now. So I was what they would be considering becoming somebody who was more influenced by the English side of my bloodline, and not the Asian Muslim blood set of my bloodline. So the direction I took was pretty much what they had expected me to do, and I pretty much didn't care. I wasn't one of those guys that was drinking a pint of lager behind the bike sheds, like many Muslims do with their vodka for medicinal purposes. I was doing it in front of the pub with a fag in one hand, a pint of beer in the other, and listening to some fantastic house music. And I did it in front of everyone, and I didn't much care for what the response was going to be.
Excellent. So when you left Islam, you briefly became an atheist. Why did you choose to become an atheist?
I don't like the word atheism. I don't think the word atheism was bandied around that time in my life in the mid 80s. I think the word atheism is bandied around now more commonly. For me, it was evolution, which is why I have the attitude now. I don't think atheism exists, because whenever 97% of atheists, when you press them, they'll say evolution. So I was okay, you're an evolutionist then. So I was more inclined to go towards evolution. I tried very hard to believe in it. I think the reason why was, and I think it's the same reason for anybody that hasn't been brought up with any, or even many with a biblical education, is the wickedness that you see on earth, the reconciliation of the wars, the rapes, the murders, the injustices, the violence meted on history that you read when you're at school, but also what you'd witness in the news at the time, not just that kind of wickedness. I've been influenced by things in the media. I mean, the one thing I'm grateful to my dad for was that he was very politically minded. So I was brought up on John Pilger. I don't know if you know of him in America, a reporter, well-renowned reporter, David Jessel, Mark Thomas, these kind of people. So I was quite, I wouldn't say astute, but I had an eye on the news and an understanding that there's a narrative more than what you read. But also things like Rough Justice. One of the influences I had in my life was a documentary called 14 Days in May, where a young black guy was incarcerated in America, was on death row, and they knew he was innocent, but he still got executed anyway. So it was those kinds of injustices as well, that a man had his life taken away from him, and for no reason. He was guilty. He was innocent. The police knew he was innocent, and there was, I couldn't reconcile that a God would allow that to happen. So, and I don't think unless you've got a good grounding in what the Bible teaches, you can ever reconcile it. So that's why I aim towards evolution, I think. And I never really accepted it. I tried hard to, but there were just so many things wrong with it.
Excellent. So you would say that definitely that the moral argument, why, if God exists, if an all-powerful, all-loving being exists, why is there evil in the world? And I think that's probably the objection that's most common. It's definitely the objection that's most common among atheists. Some people would say that it's really the only good reason to be an atheist, and that it's sufficient. That you look around the world, you see a lot of bad things happening, and that disproves the existence of any loving God. That if there is a creator of the universe, he obviously doesn't love us, and thus he's not worthy of being served, even if he happens to exist.
Absolutely, and when you look at it, the reason why, and this is my challenge to evolutionists, well, why do you think it's wrong? It's because it's a part of the psyche. Yet again, going back to the Genesis 1:20, we've been made, designed with a sense of justice within us. That's why we find this injustice so repugnant. So there's that reconciliation. I didn't know what the reconciliation was. I'll give an example. I left home, so obviously I'm a young man. I'm 16, 17 now, and I want to get jiggy with some ladies. And forgive me, but in my teens and early 20s, I was a good-looking guy, blue eyes, so I didn't look the traditional, Asian man. Fairly pale skin, blue eyes, and excuse me, but it got me laid a lot. But I knew it was wrong. There was something within me that was telling me, no, this is wrong. And yeah, you enjoy the fleeting emotion of the physicality of what's taking place, but you kind of walk away from it thinking there's something kind of not right with that. It repeats itself from week after week after week, but there is something that's wrong with it. And that goes back to what I'm saying about the reconciliation of justice, your own kind of life choices that don't sit right, because you don't recognize where that sense of justice comes from. It's only when you look at the Bible, Genesis 1:28, and the Roman scripture, that you can actually see, hang on a minute, now I can see, I felt it was wrong then I come to an understanding what the Bible teaches, and it's like, oh, I now know it's wrong. That's why it was wrong. So with people who go towards against God or that there is a God, what they're doing is they're manifesting a part of his personality and they don't see it.
Excellent. So you grew up in a Muslim environment. You didn't find any answers in Islam. No. You became an atheist. You didn't really find any satisfying answers there as well. You talked earlier about how you were kind of attracted to this children's storybook version of Jesus, but obviously that's not sufficient reason to become a Christian either. So what made you seriously start considering Christianity?
Well, for me, everything is about a process of elimination. There either is a God or there isn't. Yeah. And then, well, I'll come back to that in a moment, but the Jesus thing was, wherever you want the truth to be, you want him to be the truth. Whatever you think about life and the world and history, because I even though I didn't accept other religions, I respected those religious leaders, and I had a respect for the other religions as well. But I always wanted Jesus to be real, because no matter what you could say about that religion or that religious person, the originator of that religion per se, you could never say anything negative about Jesus. He was the ideal model. You just couldn't help but whatever snippets you ever read about him, whatever documentary you saw about the Turin Shroud, and I can remember thinking, I just hope that the Turin Shroud is true, because they used to do these documentaries with the markings on the image that's on the shroud. I mean, it's a load of rubbish. The shroud for me is a load of rubbish. But at the time, I'm a kid. I'm thinking, I hope it's true, because if it's true, that means Jesus is true. Then the Jesus of Nazareth, the portrayal by Robert Powell, that it's kind of, you can't help but see more of Jesus walking then, albeit rather than just imagery. You see Jesus as a person, more of a person. And then I'd walk past. There was 2 churches I used to walk past, and you'd see Jesus nailed on the cross. And you can't believe, why did he die? I don't understand. Why did he have to die? So after about maybe 10, 15 years of the whole nightclub scene, the nightclub lifestyle and such, I started associating with a guy that I had a lot of respect for. And he was brought up in a particular organization, though he didn't become a part of that organization, but he was brought up as one. And I asked him the question, because he said to me he was going to stop the nightclubbing lifestyle and go off and join this this Christian organization. And I asked him, well, why are you telling everybody else? Well, not telling them, you're telling me, but you're not telling everybody else what you're intending to do. And he turned around and says, it's because I know you won't laugh or mock me for it. Which is kind of strange, because he's a tough guy. He can handle himself. He doesn't need to worry about whether I'm going to laugh at him or not. It was just the way that he said it. And I remember asking him, what I don't understand is, why did Jesus have to die? I just don't get it. And then he explained the ransom. And it was like I meditated on it for a couple of weeks, and then boom, it just made the perfect sense. That's it. That's the answer. But like I said, it's a process of elimination. So he gave me a book to read about evolution, and I'd already worked out that evolution was a load of rubbish by then, but I didn't have any kind of like scientific knowledge. My arguments against evolution at the time were based on my own calculations, as it were, not any scientific education. I then read the book, and the more I read the book, the more angrier I was getting by how obvious evolution is. So rubbish. It is monumentally, it is more obvious as a fake scientific proposition than Muhammad is a prophet of God. And Muhammad is so monumentally, so obvious as a fake prophet of God that, you know, this stuff is science fiction. It's not even credible science fiction. It wouldn't even entertain anything in science fiction that nothing created everything, and everything came from nothing, and nothing created time, and nothing created the periodic elements on the elemental table, and then all these spherical objects are all spherical because nothing did it. And the, you know, so I started thinking, you know, this is a mess. And people, you know, so I got angry with that. And then the truth is as well that when I found that the Bible was the truth, or Jesus the truth, which means that the Bible is telling the truth, you find out that you learn more about what you're brought up with by learning the Bible than what you were. Let's say I learned more about Islam from reading the Bible than I did being brought up as a Muslim, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely. You had a lot of important things to say there. First, though, we have a question from a day we found yesterday. He just asked what the name of that book on evolution was.
You know what? I forgot what the name was. You know, I don't have the name with me because I don't have the book anymore. I've given it out. It was such a great read. I've given it out, but I do read books. I have many books, for instance, by Undeniable by Douglas Sachs, The Devil Delusion by Dr. David Belinsky. I have books by John Lennox, Michael Behe, Jonathan Wells, Michael Safati, I think it is. I've just read that, funnily enough. Oh, there are many books. Obviously, the evolutionists would say, well, they're crackpot. They're not real scientists. They're fakers. They're just trying to get the Bible into the schools and things like that. But no, they're not. These are real scientists with real answers, and they cover, depending on the author you read, determines the spectrum of evolution that they're attacking.
Definitely. And then the other thing that you were saying earlier, before you got off on that tangent about the book on evolution, was how there's something just really appealing about Jesus, that everyone, regardless of their beliefs, kind of wants to claim him.
Yeah.
You know, Muslims, of course, try to claim Jesus and say he was a Muslim prophet. Sometimes, you know, Buddhists will say that, well, you know, Jesus was a Buddha. He was an enlightened person. New Age cults almost always prop up and have Jesus as a central figure. Yeah, even atheists will say, well, you know, we agree with the moral teachings of Jesus. He was an excellent philosopher, but the historical Jesus never claimed to be God or anything like that. That's just something people added later on. So I agree completely that there's something very attractive about Jesus that sets him apart from every other religious figure. I mean, I can't think of any other religious figure that multiple religions try to claim.
It's interesting you say that, because that was one of the things that when I was growing up that I couldn't get away from. I was born in 1968, Anno Domini, Latin being the year of the Lord. Well, who's the Lord? Who's this Lord that my date of birth is based on? Well, it's Jesus. Well, how can you take this man outside of history when time is based on this character? 2,000 years later, we're still singing his name. How can you take this man, you know, this man out of history? Whatever this goes back to my point. Whatever the truth was, it had to be related to that man. That man is the key to the truth. And understanding who he is. So when I say I go by the process of elimination, what I was saying by that, there either is a God or there isn't. So when you work out that there is a God, one of these books has to be then telling the truth about God. And I used to, when I talk to people about it, I describe it as like sitting in a court of law. I'm the judge, and you have the Guru Granth Sahib, the Rig Veda, the Canon of the Three Baskets, the Tripitaka, the Quran, the Book of Mormon, and the Bhagavad Gita, all in one side, and you've got the Bible on the other, on its own. And I ask myself the question, or I'll bring forth the prosecution then, well, the Bible on its own is translated more than the rest of those so-called holy books as a collective. The Bible on its own is more distributed than those books as a collective. The Bible on its own is the most frequently sold book than those books are as a collective. In a court of law, once you've established that there is a God and he's written a book or authored a book, logic dictates you go with the Bible in comparison to the other lot. So then it becomes, well, then it's a process of elimination from that. Well, because Jesus says in Matthew 7:21-23 about, you know, there are going to be basically denominations, if you like, but only one of them is going to be doing the will of the Father. That's a separate subject itself. So then it becomes like, well, of all these Christian denominations, which is the one that truthfully reflects Jesus?
Yeah, definitely. You know, that's generally how philosophers or Christian apologists would argue, is they first establish that there's a God. And of course, there's very good evidence for that. Going back to what you were saying a little while ago, how ridiculous the idea of the universe just coming into existence on its own and coming from nothing, and something comes from nothing. What? That doesn't make any sense. It's completely contradictory to everything we observe in science. And of course, until very recent times, the vast majority of people who wanted to deny the existence of a deity would say, well, that's because the universe is eternal. It's just always been there. It doesn't need a cause. That has its own philosophical problems, but at least it provides some sort of explanation. Well, things have just always existed, so they'll always continue to exist. But when you say, well, the universe began to exist, well, that then needs a cause. So to say there's no cause for something that needs a cause is pretty bizarre. So you told us a little bit about how you were, you know, your journey of how you were starting to think about your life, how you were realizing that the things you were doing weren't really bringing you any lasting satisfaction. And you had this friend who was considering joining a Christian missionary organization or something like that. So we can see how the seeds were being laid. But can you tell us about the moment when you decided to be a Christian?
I don't think it was a moment. It was at the beginning of the movie JFK. I forget what the lady's name, Karen Ann Wheeler or something like that. But the movie has a motive at the beginning: to sin by silence while we should make protests makes cowards out of men. So if you know the truth of whatever the subject may be, whether it's political, scientific, and you know people are being misled, and you have the power of truth there, you're under obligation by implication to tell people that truth. Otherwise, you're a party of the lie. I could not sit there. And so it wasn't a conscious decision. It was a natural progression. You know, that's what you do. I can't sit there and know that the Bible is telling the truth. And particularly when you look at the period of time that we're talking about now. So for me, I'll quite happily say, yeah, we're in the last days. In fact, if you think about it as a football game, the 90 minutes are up. We're in time added on, and God's about to blow the whistle on this game. You know, that's where I am now. That's where I perceive myself to be. So how can I, when you go look at Ezekiel 33, where it talks about Son of Man, and watchman is what I've made you, you know, you must go and tell the house of Israel, you know, to repent, and if they don't, then that blood guilt's on them, but you'll save your own blood because, you know, you've warned them. But if you don't warn them, they will die in their error, but their blood, I'm going to ask back from you. How could I not tell people then, or not become or go along that line of faith, or let it be, not let it be a natural progression. That's just manslaughter. I mean, there are people in the world, as an example, for non-biblical reasons, are ready to risk their lives for exposing political or commercial, that's like corporate companies that are doing mendacious things, poisoning like local areas and pollution and nefarious activity. People are well prepared to, and it has cost people their lives. I've got the greatest, there is no greater responsibility right here, right now on planet Earth than opening the eyes of people to what the truth is about the biblical truth. There is no greater responsibility. And I'll challenge any human being, well, name something that's greater than that. You can't. So how could I sit there and do nothing while Jesus says, go make disciples, and then the end will come? It's a no-brainer, really. You know, it's a natural progression.
Excellent. So your experience seems reminds me a lot of J. Warner Wallace, a famous Christian apologist. He says that, you know, at one point he was, obviously he was never a Muslim, but at one point he was a very vehement atheist, that he would even go around making fun of Christians and whatnot. And then he just kind of slowly over time, just gradually began to see that Christianity was actually true. And he can't point to an exact moment where he made the difference, but now, you know, he's definitely a Christian. He was definitely an atheist before. So for some people, it's definitely just a gradual progression from one view to another.
Yeah, I think it depends on the kind of person you are, the circumstances you're in. If you're in a family that are where you're the only person and you've got strong family links, strong friendships in a strong community, maybe you do have to make a decision then, because there's going to be a backlash or a resentment or some kind of ostracism, or you're going to create a tension or friction or an embarrassment to the family. So that maybe you do have to make a decision then, because you have to, it's a calculation. Jesus himself said about like who that wants to build a house, I think it is, or I'll paraphrase now, but does not sit there and count the cost first. You know, so some people, maybe they have to make that decision. And then there's also the other Matthew scripture that talks about, you know, about some that seed that's planted on the road, the birds come and get it. Some that's seed, you know, seed finds its way in little crags, but there's no area for the roots. So, you know, a little bit of tribulation and, you know, it gets uprooted. Then there are some seed that's sown in the fine soil. And, you know, I like to think that in my instance, you know, with the kind of person I am, that the seed fell on fine soil, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So you spent a number of years in Islam and then a number of years in atheism, and now you've been a Christian for many years. What would you say are some of the key differences between these three belief systems?
Well, when I was trying to go through that period of, I say trying to go through the period of evolution, there was no, I wasn't brought up with the technology that we have now, like YouTube or internet, social media. This not exist. The only way you got information was DVDs or VHS as it was at the time, or the library, or you had to sit there and get occasional good book. You didn't know what a good book was. You had to test the ground yourself, because you didn't get recommendations that you can just simply type in on Google and get a summary of what the book is, or maybe go to some kind of website to get an opinion on the book. You were your own opinion, you know. You were the critic of the book. So I had to work a lot of things out myself. And one of the things with evolution was nobody could tell me what right or wrong was. I can make my own decisions. And the irony was, you live in a community, for instance, that says it's wrong to hit a woman. Well, unless it's a Muslim community, because Allah says it's okay to hit a woman. In fact, Allah says it's okay to hit a woman even before she's done something wrong. If you think she's going to do something, you can give her a beating. But outside of the Islamic community, you know, the attitude is it's wrong to hit a woman. Yet, you know, armies go to war killing indiscriminately. So you've got people saying it's wrong to hit a woman, yet those same people are silent when airplanes are dropping bombs, killing indiscriminately. And I used to think, well, actually, if it's okay to kill people indiscriminately, then it's okay to beat a woman. It's okay to beat a child. In fact, you can't tell me what is right or wrong because you don't know what right or wrong is. What is right or wrong? If all I am is a creature, then I used to reason, well, then every action is just predicated on chemical reactions. So you can't say what a person has done is right or wrong because all they've done is act out on the chemical equation that's taking place in their mind at any one given time. You can't tell me that love is real. You can't tell me that hate is real any more than you're arguing against God. So I used to think like that, but it was still wrong to think like that. It still just did not make sense. So when you look at, say, the identity of Christianity in comparison to that, Christianity sits with what your soul is saying, your psyche is saying. It sits right because we're made in the image of God. Evolution is just such a mess. And yet they're trying to argue by proxy, stealing the identity of Christianity. And you could see it at the time, stealing the identity of Christianity as a proxy onto evolution by saying, and then saying that they've got the higher model ground by using the same morality that you find in Christianity, the irony of it. And then when you look at Islam and the comparison there, you just couldn't compare. And to be honest with you, if you want to compare Christianity with Islam, why is it then that the most corrupt countries, the most backward countries, the most least producing countries, the least educated countries are all Muslim countries? If you want to see how good Islam is, look at a Muslim country. Look at Pakistan, look at Malaysia, look at Saudi Arabia, look at the United Arab Emirates, look at Somalia, look at Yemen. You know, look at these countries. I'm not saying all of them are bad because some of them actually, to monarchy or not really Muslim. They have that Muslim idea. I don't think, say, Libya was a Muslim country. It claimed to have been, but I don't think it really was. When you read the book, The Green Book by Muammar Gaddafi, which I thoroughly recommend to anybody, he doesn't come across as a Muslim. He comes across as a very intelligent, smart man. Certainly the best political book I've ever read. But the point being, Muslim countries are backward. So when you look at, say, the Western world, the Islamic countries don't. Amnesty International isn't a product of the Muslim world. Oxfam, Red Cross, or these agencies that go to countries where there's been an earthquake, they're not products of the Muslim world. The Muslim world relies on what the decadent West, the kuffar, do. That should tell you everything, that the Muslim world is a parasite to Christian and Jewish ingenuity. That's how I'd summarize it.
Excellent. You hit on some good points there for sure. The Muslim apologist Muhammad Hijab, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago now, he put up a survey on his channel for his Muslim viewers, like, which issues make you have doubts about Islam? And the number one answer by far was moral arguments against Islam, which is not surprising. I mean, it's really easy to make moral arguments against Islam. And the moral argument in general is very powerful, whether we're talking about with atheists or Muslims or whatever, because everyone feels like that there's right and wrong. And it's really hard even for the convinced atheist to deny that there's right and wrong, but they know they have to because that's the only thing that makes sense in their system.
I would go up to an atheist, for instance, right? When I'm in the mood of being antagonistic to one, when I've had enough of their silly, petulant, churlish arguments, and I'll say, "Do you have a sister?" And if they say yes, I'll say, "Well, if she consents, can I come over and have sex with her tonight? Do you mind? Can I have sex with your mum if she agrees?" Well, then he'll say, "Well, but she's married." I'm thinking, yeah, but why do atheists get married? That's a religious ceremony. You're mocking the identity of God. You're mocking the Bible. You're mocking religion, but your parents are married and they're atheists too. Can you explain why they're married? Why have they taken a religious ceremony that you're mocking? Okay, can I come over and have sex with your mummy tonight? What if if your dad disagrees or agrees, it's irrelevant. Whether you agree or disagree, that's irrelevant. But if your mum agrees, there's no moral argument that you can present to say that me taking your mum home to my place tonight and being intimate with her is wrong if she agrees and we agree. That's all that matters, is the agreement. So do you mind if I come over to speak to your mum tonight? Or I would say, you know what, you got a daughter, haven't you? And they'll say yes. And I'll say, well, how many penises would you like inside your daughter before enough's enough? 10, 15, maybe 20? Do you think 25 is enough different penises inside your daughter before you turn around and say enough's enough? How many different children do you want her to have with different fathers? 2, 3, maybe 4. It's not 4 not enough. How about abortion? Would you like your daughter to have abortion? Obviously, you're going to say abortion's right. So you don't mind your daughter having about 25 different cocks in her, about 3 different children with 3 different fathers, and have had 2 abortions and maybe had 2 sexually transmitted diseases too. Because that, you've got no argument to say any of that is wrong, you atheist. You ever, no, sorry, did I say atheist? I meant evolutionist, because you said that your existence is predicated on evolution. So you can't say anything. And yet, if I asked you the question, would you like your daughter to maybe meet one man, settle down with one man, spend her life with one man that truly loves her, have children with one man? Which one would you rather have? Oh, you want her to settle down with one man. Well, that's funny, because that's exactly what the Bible teaches Christians to do. And you just said that the Bible is a joke. It's fun, a bunch of fairy tales. It's funny when you start hitting the moral argument and you throw it back in their faces, right? How quickly they you know, I have actually, the atheists, evolutionists are 100% the most hypocritical creatures on this planet. They are cowards and hypocrites, every single one of them. It's the same argument I have with Muslims. 1.6 billion human beings on this planet vindicate, validate, and exonerate child rape by a principle called communal responsibility. So that's my attitude.
That's excellent. You may have seen that me smiling and laughing throughout that, and the chat was doing the same. We get quite a number of comments about how excellent your commentary was. And
it's a principle of implication. That's all it is. I took something that either there is a God or there isn't. The Bible's either telling the truth or it's not, and I've applied that. Well, okay, if I'm going to apply it to myself, I'm going to apply this to you. This is so it has to be applied that way. Otherwise, we can't make no head ground. And it's when you start hitting home truths like that, for me, that I find that these cowards, these hypocrites, these liars, and it might be savage for me to accuse these people of this, but they're quick to use that language against you. So I will turn it back. If you're going to speak to the devil, boom, I'm going to speak your language, sunshine. So if you're telling me that it's wrong for your daughter to have 25 different cocks inside her and 3 different children from 3 different fathers, 2 sexually transmitted diseases and 2 abortions, if you're going to say that's wrong and you're going to say that the Bible actually, you know, you're going to agree with it, you know what, what's stopping you going the other way? How about now, right? You've agreed with me on that you want your daughter to have a good life, one man, blah, 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 all that Bible bashing stuff that you just argued against. How about, can you give me the £25 in your wallet? Why not? I'll tell you what I don't, you know, because one of my brothers is a kickboxing sensei. He's got his own martial arts school. So he's taught me how to punch a little bit. So how about then I punch you in the throat, right? Give you a punch to the solar plexus. With the blade of my foot, I'm going to crack the back of your knee, and then I'll grab your throat and take your wallet. You see, I want to write a book, right? And the book I want to write is like, think of it as Game of Thrones, very witty, right? And it's all based on, if you evolutionists want to take over the world, well, I'm going to let you. But there's going to be an underground movement, right, of people who believe in intelligent design, and we will use evolution against you. So what happens is a group of us go out stealing. Then we get arrested. We get taken to a court of law. And then what we do is we start blaming, well, it must be the inherent DNA that we got from the magpie, because the magpie steals, or hyenas that steal the carcasses from lions. And then I get acquitted. And then we go out and start committing rape. And then what happens is we get put into a court of law, and then we start citing examples of rape taking place in the animal kingdom. And I just kind of, well, it's genetic, you know, it's inherent DNA, what can I say? And then we start going out committing cannibalism. So you can think of all the crimes that happen in the natural world, all right? Urinating on walls just for the sake of saying, well, this is my territory, you know, that kind of stuff. And you then start seeing that how stupid evolution is when you start going down that road. When you apply the logic to them, how quick they are quick to sort of backtrack and start identifying by proxy or by some kind of peculiar form of osmosis, where the part of the brain that's rejecting Christianity starts seeping into the brain. The part of the brain that deals with reality is kind of, yeah, you got a point there. I don't want to live in a world like that. For crying out loud, they've got gender non-binary. There are 100 genders now. Is that evolution? Oh, riddle me this one, Batman. 100 different genders, but there's 2 chromosomes? Help me out, please, somebody.
Yeah, great stuff there. I don't have a lot to add to that. But I did want to go back a little bit. So I said that the moral argument was the number one objection that Muslims gave, but then the number two was quite surprising because it's not something that anyone ever talks about, but you touched on it. And that's that the Muslim societies are very backwards in comparison to Western societies. And the reason that would bother a Muslim, other than, jealousy, wanting to have a more prosperous society, is that the Quran asserts over and over again that Muslims are the best of all creatures, that Allah has highly favored them. And then they look at the world and that doesn't seem to be the case.
See, that in itself, I mean, first of all, that the verse that you just wrote, cited there, I think it's 98 verse 6, that the Muslims are the best of creatures. That's 98 verse 7. 98 verse 6 is non-Muslims are the worst of creatures. We're lower than rats, dogs, pinks, or whatever. And yet, we're living in a world where if a Muslim says that, well, a Muslim, or let's go one further, if a person identifies himself as a Muslim, then by implication, they've got no choice but to agree that every word of the Quran is from their God, the words of their God, and they have no choice but to agree with it. That means that that verse is something that they have to agree with. So their neighbor, the person they work with that's a non-Muslim, they have no choice but to say, yeah, my God thinks that you're the worst of creatures. You're worse than the pig. You're worse than the dung beetle. You're worse than, those little kind of like worms that you find in dog excrement. That's what you are, the worst of creatures. That's what my God thinks of you. And as a Muslim, I've got no choice but to agree that that's what you are because my God says so. That is not hate speech. And yet, if I took the Quran to work and I said exactly the same thing, pointing to the verse, I'm a bigot, I'm a hater, I'm an Islamophobe, I'm intolerant, I'm inciting to violence, I'm a xenophobe, I'm a hater, and all the other spiel and rhetoric, that comes my way. So when you're talking about like the Muslim world, when you have that kind of mentality, what productivity are you going to get out of it?
Not a lot, apparently.
Well, this is it. And yet, when you look at the Muslim world, say Saudi Arabia, which produces the oil that it does, yet they call themselves a Muslim Brotherhood, and yet they share none of the riches and wealth to the very people that live above the land where the oil is.
Yeah, that's a good point.
What does that tell you? So if Islam is truth, right, as it says, come to this book, it's blatantly obvious, and you're looking at the world and the Islamic world, the rich ones and the poor ones, and you're seeing no equilibrium. You're seeing a disproportionate, where it is the same the world over, where the affluent are very affluent, but the people at the bottom of the ground are the ones that are suffering. The Muslim world is no different in that. Yeah, it should be a beacon of example. And they run from these countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other areas. They're running away from this ideology. And they're running to the land of the kuffar, for instance, the decadent West, the land of the kuffar. And when they get there, what do? They start opening up halal shops that start selling their kind of clothing. And they turn that area into, like France, for instance, they have ghetto areas. Amsterdam have ghetto areas that are ghetto areas now as a byproduct of Islamic immigration. And they're turning those areas into mini areas of where they've bloody well come from. So they're running from the ideology only to replicate the ideology as immigrants in the land that they've just moved to. I mean, figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty insane. You don't like your situation, so you go somewhere else and then try to put the same situation back in place. It's crazy.
And this is it, because you see, it goes back to when I was growing up, what the mentality of the Muslim is. When you're in a minority, behave like a lamb. When you're on equal footing, you behave like a fox. When you're in superior number, you behave like a wolf. And that's how Islam manifests itself wherever it goes.
Interesting. And of course, you know, we're called to always be like the lamb, so to speak. Not that we just allow ourselves to be victims, but we're never going to be an aggressor.
No, of course not. How are you supposed to win people over to truth if it's a gun to the head? That's not the kind of love that God wants. That's a morbid fear, not a reverential fear. And so when it talks about the fear of God in the Bible, it's a reverential fear. It's a bit like, you know, having that parent you don't want to displease, you don't want to upset, you don't want to offend by your actions. So I find with the Bible that I'm free to do what I like, as long as I don't bring reproach on God's name and I don't break any of his commandments. And which is interesting, because that goes back to what Jesus said in Matthew 7, I think it's 13, 14, where he talks about broad and spacious is road leading to destruction, many are finding it, whereas narrow is a road and few are the ones finding it. And the perception of the Muslim and the atheist is, oh, you Christians or anybody following Christianity, you've got a narrow mind. The reality is, no, you're the one with the narrow mind. I've got free will. I'm making choices and I've chosen to walk on this. The irony is I'm on the broadest road of all, because mine's based on decisions. Yours, you've actually chosen other men to be your God. You see, in the atheist world, the evolution world, the Richard Dawkins, the Lawrence Krauses, these kind of people have become your God. They're your gurus. They're your scholars for dollars. And in the Islamic world, you've got the Mohijabs, you've got the Ali Dawas, the Ahmadidas, the Zakir Naiks. These have become your gurus and gods. Me, on the other hand, I'm not being led by other men. I'm being led by a book that's been inspired by God. How can you turn around and say that I'm narrow-minded? I'm broad-minded. You're the one that's narrow-minded when you look at it.
Excellent point there. First of all, we have a super chat from Wooter. He did not leave a message, just a donation, so thank you very much for that, Wooter. We have a question from Lloyd, and let me remind the audience that we now would be a good time to start putting questions you may have for my guest in the chat. We pretty much through his story. I do have a couple questions to sum it up, but we're mostly through what I wanted to go over. So if you have questions, put those in now. The question from Lloyd is, did you learn any of this material with specific citations from the Sharia law in madrasa or the mosque, or did you just observe this behavior in other Muslims?
You observe it in other Muslims. So it's like I said, they have like a two-faced personality. There's the face that they have for the public world, the non-Muslim world, and then they have the face that's hidden behind closed doors, that when the door closes, there's a different personality and mindset. And I think you have moments in your life that are catalysts. And I think for me, it was about 1987, 88, when Salman Rushdie wrote the Satanic Verses. And that for me is like a pivotal point, where that face that was hidden behind closed doors started to come outside more in the open now as to what this religion is really like. Slowly but surely, from that moment on, for me, is when the reality of this religion's attitude started to make itself manifest in Europe.
Would it be fair to say that you probably didn't hear a lot of explicit teaching about how Christians are evil or they're the worst of all creatures, but you just absorbed that attitude from the way people behaved and the incidental things they say?
Well, it's more a case of things like, look, they bring out the Quran. So when you bring out the Quran, it's predicated on the Bible being corrupt. So you get a lot about, you don't have to understand anything much about Christianity. They're not going after Christianity because there's nothing about Christianity that you can deride or mock. They may go after, they believe Jesus is the Son of God, but it's more an attack on the Bible. So they're undermining the authority of the Bible, and that's the get-go, the goal. You see, if you're attacking Christianity, you might be inclined to look at the Bible. But if you're going to attack the Bible, it's pretty much you're going to stay away from it. That's the attitude. And then they try, like I said, they try and conflate the decadent West with the sexual revolution of the 60s and say certain areas of entertainment, and they try and teach that, well, that's Christianity. You know, what you're seeing on TV with this lewd dancing, these low cut tops and the short skirts, that's Christianity. That's the image that they try and brainwash you with. See, now that we've got social media, YouTube, Twitter, and all these other forms of communication, now you get the more sophisticated forms, because they've had to retaliate in a different manner, because people who are reading the Quran are using the very same platforms to expose it. So they're countering it with a like manner, if you like.
Excellent. So I have a couple comments. KL said, "We love everyone, including our enemies. That's true freedom. Praise Jesus." Amen to that, that we're free to love everyone. We're not obligated. We don't have this burden. It's our privilege to do so. You have a request from Stickman Sam. He says, "Can James please create a YouTube channel? I love his style doing reductio ad absurdum with explicit examples."
I would love to, right? But I it's almost like I would work better with somebody that's already got a set up channel that I can almost, if I was to get around to doing it on my own, I think I wouldn't be able to do it. I need to be sort of like antagonized or poked or prodded or pushed, if you like. So if somebody wanted to open up a channel with me, and we can get down deep down and dirty with Islam and evolution, you know, let's bring it on. Let's do it, and we can make a lot of money.
Excellent. I'll have to have you on again on my channel then. So Stickman, a more serious question asks, what topic would you start with when engaging a Muslim?
That's a very good question, and I think, to be honest with you, when I engage with Muslims, you can talk about things. For instance, let's say, for example, you can try and find things in comparison. Let's just say that this answer comes twofold, right? The first fold is you can have a 2-hour discussion with a Muslim. You may even get the opportunity to open the Bible, and you could think you're getting somewhere. Then right at the end of the discussion, he turns around and says, "Well, the Bible's been corrupted." You know, and I think, well, effing Jeffing's sake, that was a waste of time. I learned this time ago. Effing Jeffing's sake, that was a waste of time. I tell you what, you know, I can't be bothered with this anymore. I'm just going to go straight for, you think the Bible's being corrupted. Let's just get down to it. You know, I haven't got the time in my life to listen to you drone on about how you think this, you think that, and then you're going to start going into the science of the Quran, and then you're going to start going into how there are prophecies, and then when I bring out prophecies, you're going to say at the end of it, "Yeah, but the Bible's been corrupted." Let's just deal with the Bible's corruption then. I can't be bothered to waste my time otherwise. The second prompt to that answer is, never let the Muslim take the lead. Never do it. And there's a reason for that. If you've got the Bible in your hand, you've got the Word of God in your hand. The Word of God is the authority. Islam is based on demons or Satan or a mixture of the two. That's assuming that you can prove Muhammad even existed, because I've listened to the debate between David Wood and Robert Spencer, and you know what? Every time I listen to it, I come away with a different answer. He either did or he didn't, to the point of, I don't know. But so my answers are sometimes predicated on either one, depending what mood I'm in. If I'm in a cold mood, he didn't exist. If I'm in a hot mood, he did. Right? By that I mean, well, if I can't be bothered to bring up 9-year-old Aisha, you know, and his sexual intercourse or rape of her, then I'm, you know, that's why I say that when I'm hot. But when I'm cold, it's like he didn't exist. Anyway, don't let the Muslim take control of the conversation. The reason why I say that is you'll find that they control the language. They'll say things like, "Well, let's just agree that Jesus is just a prophet." So then they're lowering who Jesus is in the outworking of God's purpose. They'll very craftily turn around and say other things to take control of the situation, and it can sound or look like what they're doing is trying to find some commonalities. But the truth of the matter is They're making you, out of this fear of disrespecting Islam or offending Islam, they're trying to lower the role and minimize the role, position, and authority of Jesus in the Bible. So I never allow them to do that. You know, you're in control and you're there to tell them. They're not there to tell you. If they want to tell you, tell them to come around 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. You know, then you can come around and you can preach to me. But right here, I'm standing here preaching to you, so I'm in control. That's my attitude.
Excellent. I think that's good advice because, you know, we often get into these word game situations where it's like you say the Quran says one thing, they say it means another, and you just go in circles. So by taking the initiative, then you can kind of control the conversation, so to speak, and actually make it go somewhere productive. That doesn't mean that they'll believe you, but at least you'll be able to get your points across. Whereas if you let them to control the conversation, you may never get to bring up the things you want to talk about.
I think when people are reading the Bible, they need to read with all seriousness some of the harsh truths that are in there. It's one thing to say, yeah, God loves mankind. Of course he does. Nobody would challenge that. Jesus makes it clear in John 3:16, John 17:3, or Matthew 28:19 and 20, Matthew 24:14, Romans 10:13, 14, 15. I can go on. But there are other scriptures that are just as important, that are very much, when Jesus speaks, you have to sort of shut up and think, hang on a minute here, he's being serious here. When Jesus speaks at Matthew 7:21-23, he's not talking about the world. You know, many will say to me that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and do powerful works in your name and expel demons in your name? And I will say to them, get away from me, you workers of lawlessness. Jesus wasn't speaking to Muslims. He wasn't speaking to Hindus, atheists, or agnostics, or Jews. He was speaking to Christians. So even there are Christian denominations that Jesus is going to turn around and say, and this is Jesus speaking, get away from me. Then you got Matthew 7:13, 14, where it says, broad and spacious is the path to destruction. Many other ones finding it, whereas narrow is the road. Few are the ones finding it. Then you got the scripture, I think it's in First Thessalonians or Second Thessalonians chapter 1, where it says, it's righteous in God's part to pray tribulation for those who are giving you tribulation in a flaming fire, as he brings vengeance on those who do not know God and those who do not obey the good news. Then you got Matthew 24:36 that turns around and says, just as the days of Noah were, so the presence of the Son of Man will be. For in those days, they were eating and drinking, men marrying, women being given in marriage, and they took no note until the flood came and swept them all away. So the presence of the Son of Man will be. So what's the point of what I'm trying to say? What I'm trying to say is, few people are going to survive what's coming. The bulk of mankind are going to be slaughtered. Zephaniah confirms that as well. That's the reality. So it's Jesus says, seek out those deserving and stay there till you leave. We're not there to, I'm not going to waste my time with a Muslim that just wants to argue and try and win an argument. You know, coming off with embryology, coming off with like the universe is expanding, all this pseudo-scientific claptrap. I'm not going to waste my time with you. You know, I'm going to go for, it's a bit like, you know, using the analogy of an earthquake has taken place and you send in those people to specially trained, skilled, well-equipped people to find people that are inside the rubble. They've got sniffer dogs, they've got heat find detector equipment, they've got oxygen detection equipment, they've got equipment that can, the slight rustle of sound to see if there's anybody in, you know, and then they bring the machinery in with expertise to pull the concrete away and save those people. But if I come across a muppet that wants to waste my time, right, arguing about trivialities, hey, you know what, Sunshine, I ain't got the time for you. I'm going to go off and speak to somebody who actually wants to listen. John 4:24, right? God is searching for such like ones to worship him, for God is a spirit. I'm going to go with what the scriptures say, not some sentimentality of, oh, but God loves everybody and we must love anybody. Yeah, you're true. That's right. But he also makes it quite clear, several passages have to be remembered. Don't waste your time. And quite frankly, to be honest with you, with the way the world is, a lot of people are a waste of time. But you've got to use your discernment to find the right person. And the right people are there. So until the end comes, we've just got to do our best to find the right person.
Excellent stuff there. You know, unfortunately, in contemporary society, we often only preach half of the gospel. We preach the good news that Jesus came to save people, that God loves us and whatnot, but we don't preach the bad news. And without the bad news, that is that we are all guilty, we're all accountable to God, we all deserve destruction, the good news kind of is meaningless.
It's that I think it's in 1 Samuel 16:9 where it says about God, his eyes are roving, and it's not what the eyes, what the thing that appeals to the men's eyes, God sees with the heart. You know, we don't know who is going to respond to the message of the Bible. You don't know who's going to respond. All you can do as somebody as professing to be a follower of the Bible is do your best to present it. That, you know, because if you don't present it in the right way, you in effect could be putting a millstone around your neck, and like Jesus, you'll be pitched into. It'll be better for you to be pitched in the sea. So this is the other side of, you know, what you're saying there. It's a good message, but that message comes with responsibility. Ezekiel said that, you know, it's blood guilt if you don't tell people. And one of the comments in the notes there was throwing pearls before swine. Jesus has given you the counsel of how to do the ministry as well. He says, seek out those deserving. So he's giving you the responsibility to work out if you're wasting your time or not. He's given you the dignity to work it out. He's saying you work it out if you're wasting your time or not. If you're thinking you're wasting time, walk away. He's saying that.
Yeah, that's a good point, that, you know, God puts the responsibility on us to make that call. He doesn't just give us commands and we're supposed to blindly follow. He wants us to be active participants in his work. Switching gears a little bit, Lloyd asked, can you tell us if there was any explicit knowledge of Sharia given to Muslims in, you know, Quran school and high school and, you know, your Muslim education? And if so, which manuals do they read and what is recommended?
It goes, it's different throughout the world. It's different depending what the community is, what type of Islam is there, what language they speak. It differs throughout the world. I won't comment on that. You have to bear in mind, I'm 52 years old now. The education that I got when I was younger was mostly done in Arabic and in English. We didn't have the sophisticated materials that they have now. It was basically, this is what Islam is, this is what we believe. And then the rest of it came from Ahmadiyyat. There was no Sharia at the time in the country, and whatever Sharia there was, it would have been in places like London, Leicester, Birmingham, and such places, big cities where there was a greater Muslim population than where I was living at the time. I live in a town.
Excellent. So Virginia asks, what's the current temperature of Christians in the UK? Are they waking up or are they still steeped in liberalism?
Very liberal, but I think sometimes, you see, it goes back to something that we were discussing before the show started tonight about who's running the planet. Yeah, I think that is something else that Christians have to take in mind, that the Bible makes it quite clear that Satan and the demons are running the show. It's their world. Everything that's being done on the world scene today is done to a plan. It's not chaotic. It's not like things are happening and the demons and Satan thinking, wow, that's great. Oh, wow, I didn't think of that. Or I didn't know that was going to happen. No, everything's going along to a well-orchestrated plan and agenda. I sometimes think that when you look at immigration, the history has told us many things about importing this religion of Islam. So, but they've still done it. So there must be an end game there. They know what the byproduct of importing Islam is. It's going to create schism. It's going to create tensions. It's going to create problems at every sphere, from school level to the university level to at place at work, and involved in politics and within your community. So for me, I think there's an end game there as to why they've imported it. There's an agenda behind it. So, yeah, that's where I'm at. I don't know what the end game is and why, but I don't think it's by accident.
Excellent. Talitha comments, I've heard a preacher say that the majority of those who he preaches sermons to are not really listening. It is the one or two that are truly seeking or listening that is gleaning what he is saying that he is trying to reach.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that attitude that when we go out and we do evangelism, that the vast majority of people probably won't listen, or they may listen, but they won't actually believe us or apply anything to their lives. But the few that do listen makes it worthwhile.
Well, absolutely. And I think as well, you see, there's a twofold message, isn't it? One, you can find people that'll listen. Two, they've been given a warning. They've been put on notice. Yeah. So when the system starts to break down, those who haven't made the decision or have mocked or have derided or have chosen some other course of life will have to be accountable for their decisions. But they'll be able to look back and say, well, I had that chance, but I didn't take it. Notice what Thessalonians says. They did not obey the good news, or what Jesus says in Matthew, they took no note. When you're living in a world that says you can have 100 variations of sex, right, genders, out of 2 chromosomes, you have to ask serious questions as to what's going on in the world. When homosexuality is promoted as a normal lifestyle, okay, and normal, what is normal about a man consuming another man's semen? Where is the normality in that? And don't tell me because it's protein, right? Where, if evolutionists will try and have me believe that homosexuality is normal, well, really, why does the anus not self-lubricate then? Why does the anus suffer from anal prolapse? It seems to me that nature in itself shows you that homosexuality is wrong. You can't defend homosexuality or the practice of homosexuality with nature or revolution, because that contradicts it, and you can't defend it with intelligent design or a God belief, because it contradicts that too. So, we're living in a world now that you have to, rather than wait, when that is so prevalent, there are very few people who you can glean and reach out to. The thing is, there's a fear factor, and this goes back to the comments about like liberalism. There are human beings that know that this is wrong. They know it's wrong, but they are very timid. They feel intimidated, pressured to have a voice to speak out against it. And what they need is to hear a voice to encourage them. Do you remember when the nation of Israel was standing in front of the Philistines and out came Goliath, and he was threatening, I'll take on any one of you lot and blah, blah, blah. All you got to do is bring your hardest man. And if he can beat me, then the Philistines will become subservient to the Israelites. And out comes David, a little kid, and he slays Goliath. And it was like, that was just the catalyst that the nation of Israel needed. And then all of a sudden they became strong. And it's like some people are out there waiting to hear a voice to give them the motivation and strength. And it's finding those people. So as far as the liberals in this country is concerned, yeah, of course they're weak. They're running the show at the moment. And I would recommend, do you remember the, the Unabomber in America? Must have been the 90s. He wrote a manifesto. It's called the manifesto. I think it's called the Industrial Society, and he was predicting how liberals. This is back in 1996, I think, when it was released. He was predicting how the liberals will control dialogue and politics in the future. It's almost prophetic what he wrote, because he must have conceived the idea before he put it in literature. I recommend people to read that as well, because that question about liberals controlling, he was talking about that in the mid-90s.
Yeah, of course, his main point was that those in power will control the means of communication, will control the technology, and thus we should reject technology. Well, we would disagree with that point, I think. I mean, we're here on the internet speaking over communication, we're getting our message out. But we would certainly agree with the point you are alluding to, that those in power have, in fact, he correctly predicted that those in power have used the means of media to kind of silence opposition, to put their viewpoints forward and make anyone with any other viewpoint feel like their views are invalid, ostracize them from society, that kind of thing.
The thing is, though, I don't know how it is in America, but in the north of England, those kind of people with personalities that there were phrases like he wears his heart on his sleeve, or he tells it as it is, or you know where you stand with him, or he calls it out for what it is. A spade is a spade. Those were default verbatim vernaculars identifying a certain personality trait that you like or loathe, you admired, because you knew where you stood with the person, that they said what they thought, or they said what they meant. They said for them what was true. We're now living in a society where you can't do that anymore. And such like people like you that were held in high esteem, that held with respect, are now the villains. And those heroes have been removed from society. You'll notice as well that in the entertainment industry, and say with politics and discussion chat shows, it's more emotion than logic. You don't like, I'll give an example. When you watch a nature program, it's all about evolution. They don't propose or suggest intelligent design. The reason being is because when you listen to the argument and you are honest with yourself, you have to go with intelligent design. It has the answers, evolution doesn't. So the narrative has already been sold to a society that is not given an option of choice. And to find the evidence for intelligent design, you really have to search for it. It's not willingly offered. Yeah. And that same attitude is prevalent in all walks and spheres: political, religious, social, academic. The education system now is defunct. It's predicated on Google. You can just Google your answer now. You know, and it's all emotion, not logic.
Yeah, you're quite right that another way to put this is that you can decide what's true, and what feels good to you is what's actually true.
Moral relativism.
Yes. So Talitha said that Manning Johnson grew up in the church. He became a Marxist. He said that Marxist tactics are to subvert the church. This is the result of what we are seeing. And then she recommends his book, Keller, Communism and Common Sense. Do you have any thoughts on the penetration of communist thought into the church?
Well, yeah, cultural Marxism. Well, you're allowing some churches, the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England, say evolution is true. I've got a cutout from the Times newspaper in England. I think it was 2005, the 11th of November, that the Pope at the time was saying that to take the Adam and Eve account literal was to be fundamental, and that evolution is true, and there's sufficient evidence for evolution to be true. The Pope before him kissed the Quran. There you go. What more do you want me to say about these churches? Can I say anything more? And if that's not enough, then I suggest The Two Babylons by Reverend John Hislop.
Very good. Of course, you know, it's important to me, and I know from talking to you earlier that it's important to you as well, to not have the fighting within the church. I would just say that there are real believers in every church building, and there are false believers in every church building. The actual church is the union of all people who trust in Jesus alone, not in any leadership that is given from their church above God. Tutunen said that in her country, Finland, that they have a Christian politician who talked about what the Bible says about sex in public, and now she's been interrogated by the police multiple times. As soon as the charges are dropped, the prosecutor brings them up again. And isn't that sad that to teach what the Bible teaches is certain people use the legal system against you?
I would just go over to that prosecutor and say, can I come over and have sex with your wife tonight? Why is it wrong for me to ask your wife? You haven't give me a phone number at least, and let me sort of Skype her, And if she fancies me and I fancy her, and let's face it, I'm incredibly fanciable, the likelihood is she's not going to refuse. So, you know, why are you getting in the way of human nature? That's what I would say. And if he said no, and I'll say, well, okay, so you're following the Bible then.
Excellent.
That's one of the 10 Commandments, surely.
Indeed it is. So if people have any last comments, they can put them in the chat now. I have two questions that I would like to ask you to kind of sum up our talk. My first question is, we've talked about some of the moral problems and the evil in Islam, but my question would be, what is your top reason for doubting that Islam could possibly be a true religion from God?
I think that's quite an easy one. Either the Bible has been corrupted and Muhammad's telling the truth, or the Bible has not been corrupted and thus Muhammad's a false prophet. It's really that simple.
Yeah, excellent. The Islamic dilemma, as we call it, you know, the Quran affirms the truth of the Bible and then it contradicts the Bible. So it's kind of false either way.
Yeah.
Either false in its claim that the Bible is true, or it's false because it contradicts the Bible. And then my final question, which I think would be a great way to end the show, is what is your top reason for believing Christianity is true? This may be distinct from the reasons why you came to accept Christianity, but someone who is honestly seeking accurate information, what would you say? What is the top reason that Christianity is the one true religion?
I think when you've worked out, I'll go back to the beginning. It's always like a process of elimination. It's not one reason. Everybody has their own route. The Apostle Paul says, "I planted, Apollos watered, but God kept making it grow." I think 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 3, or somewhere around there. So everybody's route to truth is different. God can use any situation if the heart is right to bring that person to him. If I was to make a suggestion, I would say it all comes down, there either is a God or there isn't. And it's for me, I think the process of elimination starts well there, because if you started straight away with the Bible, I don't think it has, and I don't want this to be misunderstood. If people have doubts about God's existence, then a study of the Bible is a mere academic structure. That's all. They've got to understand that there actually is a God. And once you've convinced people that there actually is a God, and they can articulate and give you reasons why they believe that there is a God in existence, then all those questions about why God allows suffering, who is Jesus, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, all those questions start to make sense on a different level than somebody who's wishy-washy about whether God exists or not, and is looking at the Bible and is merely looking at it from an academic point of view.
Excellent. That's very well put. So along the same lines, what advice would you give to someone who may be watching now that is not sure what to believe, that they're seeking the truth? What would you say to do?
I think there's a scripture, Proverbs 18:13, and it says, "He who answers a matter before he hears the facts, it's a shame and humiliation to him." Another way of putting it, and I heard this from a guy called Chuck Missler, condemnation before investigation leads to humiliation. Yeah. I think the best way to ever have a comment on a subject is to study the subject. Then you're in a better position to have a comment on it. We're living in a day and age now where too many people make comments about subjects they have zero understanding on. Right? People commented about intelligent design, they know nothing about intelligent design. People comment about evolution, they know nothing about evolution. The same could be said about Islam, the Bible, and all the other isms and schisms and communisms. The best way for somebody, if they want to know the truth, is take a half-hour study every week. Yeah, study the Bible, read it from the book of Matthew. Start there. All right. If you reject it, you're rejecting it based on what you've attempted to do, for yourself, rather than relying on somebody else. Because you see, when it all starts to happen, when this house of cards starts to fall, the only person you're going to blame is yourself. God's not going to blame somebody else for fooling you. He's going to blame you. He's not going to say, well, I'll let you off because Richard Dawkins told you about evolution. See, I would say, because like, just on that alone, right? Romans 1:20 says something really interesting. It says, for his invisible qualities are clearly seen from the world's creation onward, because they are perceived by the things made, even his eternal power and Godship, so that they are inexcusable. There is no excuse for evolution. There is simply no excuse. Now, I'm not a scientist, and I can see, right, whether through a telescope or a microscope, that there is no evidence for evolution at any level. These people, these educated people, these scientists, they see it at a better level than I ever could at this moment in time. So they know more about how impossible it is. So if your belief system is based on what somebody else says, well, that's not how God sees it. You've got to make these choices yourself. You've got to come to conclusions yourself, and that's how you get the faith that's built on the rock mass and not the sand. And there's the difference. You doing the education work for yourself, searching for yourself, and not relying on any other people.
Excellent. Very well put. You know, when I'm having a conversation with someone, one thing I always do is I encourage them to not just simply believe what I'm telling them, but to go and investigate it for themselves. You know, we have truth on our side. We're not afraid. We don't expect you to just believe our words because we say them. We say, go and look at the evidence. And if you look at the evidence and you've already made up your mind ahead of time, of course, you're going to see whatever belief you want to see in the evidence. But if you look at the evidence with an open mind, I'm quite confident that you're going to come to the realization that Christianity is true.
The thing is, if people doubt that statement, then why do they think over 1 billion human beings follow Hinduism? If you're a Christian, you already know Hinduism is false. Do you think those Hindus have looked at their religion to see if it's true or not? Clearly they haven't. They are Hindus by rote. Muslims are the same. They are Muslims by rote. Evolutionists are the same. They're atheists by rote, so on and so forth. Because they haven't looked. You know, and you will be like that unless you do the same.
Yeah, definitely. You know, Islam is based on authority. You learn what your teachers tell you, you repeat it, and that's the end of the matter. You're not supposed to think things through. You're certainly not supposed to go investigate other religions to see whether they have any truth in them. You're just told they don't, and that's the end of the story. You know, the same thing is often true in atheism, that it's not the imams telling you what to believe, it's the quote unquote scientists, which aren't really, yes, they're science, but when they speak on cultural matters, they're not speaking about science, they're speaking scientism, this idea that science is the true belief system, that whatever science tells you is true. Well, science doesn't tell you anything. Science gives you data. It takes the scientists to interpret it for you. And if they approach that data with a certain view in mind, they're going to come out of that data with the same view still in mind, most likely. So ultimately saying that you're an atheist because science says that God is unnecessary, well, actually you're just believing in authority. You're not doing anything different than what you accuse religious people of doing, simply believing it because someone told you it's true.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Totally agree with that.
So yes, any closing thoughts from you? The chat has been debating whether the John Paul II actually kissed the Quran or not. I mean, I sure hope that's not what people get out of this discussion, because that was like the least important thing said the entire time.
Well, I think it's a bit of a revelation for some people that that the Pope can have such a view towards Islam. I would Google also some of the quotes that he made. He said that I think Islam was closer to Catholicism than any other religion because they believe in the one God, or they believe with a lot more sincerity, or something like that. So, and which I find absolutely disgusting, because it empowers the Islamic religion when they hear Christians talk like that. because it gives credibility to Islam. So you're basically patting Islam on the back as being true. And yet Corinthians says, you know, the table of God and the table of demons, you can't be drinking the cup of God and the cup of demons. Well, either the true God has had something to do with the Quran or he hasn't. If he hasn't, then it's demonic and you shouldn't have anything to do with it. God says, hate bad, love what's good. The Quran is bad, hate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the current Pope recently, I don't know, maybe a year ago, said something like, it's not the Christian's responsibility to do evangelism. And it was like, what? What do you mean? That's like the number one thing that Christians are called to do. What he meant is that your first priority should be to live a good moral life and be a good example. And I don't disagree that you should do that, but you don't come out and say that a Christian shouldn't be doing evangelism. That's just totally crazy.
Yeah, but that's evangelism is all they did in the first century. You know, Jesus makes, how many times does he say, this good news of the kingdom will preach in all the inhabited earth for a witness to all the nations, then the end will come. He gives the command at the end of Matthew, go and make disciples. Then you've got, like I said, the Ezekiel scripture, you've got blood guilt on you. Then you've got Romans 10, 13, 14, 15. Where do these people get these attitude from? It's because they want to be Sunday afternoon lip-wristed cup of tea with a cucumber sandwich Christians. Good example, you can have an atheist live a good life because not because they're following evolutionary atheism, it's because they're following that person, that psyche trait that's in the book of Romans about, you know, we're made in God's image. What saves people's lives is going and preaching the good news. That's what saves people's lives. John 17:3, this means everlasting life. They're turning, you know, they're taking knowledge of you, the only true God, and of the one whom you sent forth, Jesus Christ. Not living next door to a good Christian. That's not going to save people's lives.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's part of the story, but if you think that that's the whole story, then you're crazy. I'm actually going to be talking with someone by the name of Eric Hernandez on this Wednesday. And one of the things he said in a sermon that he pointed me to kind of give me an introduction to the topic is this fellow had a really powerful testimony that God overcame drug addiction in his life and totally changed his life. And he said, that's all I need. That's all I need to tell people what happened to me. We go out and do evangelism. We play games with people. We have a good time. We feed them. And then I tell them my story. And he said, and Eric said in reply, well, if a Muslim did the exact same thing, maybe his testimony is even greater. Maybe he was addicted to 10 different drugs and not just one. And he claims all overcame those. And he comes and he plays with the children and he feeds people. Would you convert to Islam? And the guy said, of course not. So it's a necessary part. I mean, if someone's telling you that the Bible is true and they are abusing their loved ones or they're cheating people or whatnot behind closed doors and you find out about it, of course you're going to doubt their message. So living a good life is part of it, but to act like it's all that matters is just totally ridiculous.
Yeah, I think you see, this goes back to a point that I make with the Quran when I'm speaking to Muslims and such. It is the Quran that defines Islam, not Muslims. Muslims do not define Islam. The Quran does. And it's the same thing with Christianity. You find that, and the Bible makes that clear in 2 points. 2 Timothy 3:16, where it says, all scriptures inspired of God, beneficial for teaching, for reproving, for setting things straight. And then you got the other one, 1 Corinthians 4:6. To paraphrase it, don't go beyond the things written. So to understand Christianity, you get it from the Bible. You don't get it from external sources. And it's the same thing with Islam. So, and I use that because it's when people say there's a good Muslim, a polite Muslim. No. That's an uneducated Muslim. He's what the Quran condemns people like that. That's a hypocrite. So when you use the sources, then you can define what the reality is about what the person is, whether the person is what they claim they are or whether they're not. And that's God's way of teaching you what the person is, not men.
Yes, definitely. Lloyd did just point out that Islam is more than just the Quran, and I don't think you were saying that it was exclusively the Quran. Of course, the Hadith are considered sacred, and the
absolutely.
Sirah defines how Muslims view Muhammad and whatnot. But the point is the same, that you go to the source texts, and that's how you discover what a religion actually teaches. You don't just talk to one random person, and if they're a nice person, believe their religion's true, and if they're a mean person, believe their religion's false. And furthermore, don't just assume that you talk to someone and they have a excellent understanding of the doctrines of their belief system. They probably don't. I mean, most people don't get into the details. They may have beliefs that are considered heretical by the religion. We don't judge people by their religion, but we don't judge a religion by what the people in it say. We judge a religion by what the religious texts teach.
Yeah, and that goes back to what Jesus said in Matthew 7:21. Yeah, 21 to 20. Jesus makes it clear there for everyone to see.
Excellent. So any closing thoughts from you? Anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
No, I think I've enjoyed actually speaking with you tonight, Thaddeus. I think it's a privilege of mine, considering that I listen to your show, to be given an opportunity to come on your show and give my experience and speak about Islam and my journey towards, accepting that the Bible is the Word of God. And if ever there was an opportunity to come on a show again and speak, I would love to.
Excellent. Yeah, I just looked down and we were talking for 2 hours. I had no idea it was that long. Time flew by. I really enjoyed it. Based on the comments, the audience really enjoyed it, and I would definitely love to have you on again another time. Just a couple quick announcements before I sign off. I do have a number of things coming up. Tomorrow is my 40th birthday. I'm going to be having an informal live stream to celebrate. No set agenda. People can bring whatever questions they like. They can bring questions about Islam, bring questions about Christianity, ask me personal questions, whatever. We'll just hang out and have a good time. I'll post that shortly. It will be tomorrow evening in the US. So it'll be the late night in Europe or early morning Monday in Asia. Then later in this week, I already alluded to, I'll be having a talk with Eric Hernandez on how to use apologetics to do evangelism. On Tuesday, I believe, I will be having a talk with Lloyd and Io, continuing our look at how the Islamic Sira literature elevates Muhammad to the status of a deity. And then finally, last announcement, next Saturday, hopefully, tentative at this point, but I believe it'll be next Saturday, I'll be having a talk with Anthony Rogers. People may recognize him from Acts 17. We'll be discussing how Allah is made to be like a human being, how he's made into a physical being with body parts and whatnot, and why this can't possibly be symbolic if we take the Muslim literature seriously. So thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, whether it is just beginning or whether it is coming to an end. And thanks again to James for sharing his testimony and his excellent thoughts on a number of matters.
Thank you to everybody. Thank you, Thaddeus. And I would like to thank the audience too. Thank you.
Excellent. God bless everyone. Have a great day.